A review of Total War Rome 2 in 2021. I wanted to do a retrospective review of Total War Rome 2 last year, since my first few videos on the channel were retrospective reviews of Empire, Napoleon, and Shogun 2, and I actually quite enjoyed making them. However, I figured that since Rome 2 has actually gotten some DLC campaigns and patches fairly recently, that it didn't quite deserve the retrospective treatment. It deserves a full review with all of its additional content and patches included. So, here goes nothing. A full review of Total War Rome 2 in 2021, with all the DLC packs included. First impressions. When you first boot up the full game with all DLCs included in 2021, you are greeted by a huge selection of campaigns to choose from several Grand Era campaigns to more smaller, focused regional campaigns. This is one of the aspects of Rome 2 that is undoubtedly a positive. It has quite a bit going on in terms of campaign selection. Additionally, you have access to quite a few playable factions that are diverse and have unique unit rosters, buildings, and even tech trees that distinguish even the faction in the same culture group from each other. But there is something I should note right from the start that stands in stark contrast to the original Rome Total War. Everything is available to you right from the start. The era of having unlockables is clearly over in Rome 2. And the variety here available from the start makes everything from Empire to Shogun 2 to Rome 1 and Barbarian Invasion pale in comparison. It also makes me a bit upset that Empire didn't at least have some DLC to unlock and flesh out factions like Persia and the Indian factions. I have to say that the plethora of regional and era campaigns reminds me of Medieval 1, my first Total War game. You boot up Medieval 1 and you're greeted by 3 grand campaigns with different start dates, the early, high, and late campaigns. And of course, with the complete edition, you get the Viking Invasion regional campaign. Now, with these initial impressions out of the way, let's get into some specifics. The Grand Campaigns. Total War Rome 2, as I said before, has both regional and Grand Campaigns on offer here. The Grand Campaigns are the main Grand Campaign, with the 272 BC start date. The Imperator Augustus campaign starts in 41 BC, and it starts during the Second Triumvirate, which is another cool start date and acts as a sort of high-era campaign. Additionally, Imperator Augustus was a free DLC, so that was nice indeed. Additionally, there is the Empire Divided campaign, which is essentially Rome 2's late-era campaign that begins in 270 AD, with the crisis of the 3rd century at its height and the empire in pieces. Each of these grand campaigns has a full set of interesting and unique playable factions, with unique unit rosters, tech trees, events, missions, and goals. I have to say, though it isn't a particularly perfectly executed campaign due to the lack of horde mechanics in Rome 2, I'm glad they added Empire Divided a bit late into Rome 2's life cycle. I understand why they made it a Rome 2 campaign rather than an Attila one. Its start date is just a bit too early for it to fall under the umbrella of Attila, perhaps. But of course, the mechanics of Attila would have benefited it. In any case, I'm glad it's here. Now let's go over each of the campaigns. Let's talk first about the so-called Grand Campaign. This campaign is of course near and dear to everyone's hearts. When you go over the faction selection screen, you'll immediately see that everything has been made more realistic. Ahistorical amalgamations are kept to a minimum, and starting positions are made to be as historical as possible. However, this isn't to say there aren't sacrifices made for the sake of gameplay. But the fact is that Rome 2's level of abstraction is less than Rome 1's by a long shot. at least when comparing vanilla to vanilla, and perhaps even with some Rome 1 mods as well. In any case, the Grand Campaign starts in 270, when Rome was simply one political player amongst many, and you have a ton of playable factions, counting all the DLC packs, of course. In this campaign, unless you choose big empires like the Seleucids or Ptolemies, it's about growing your small faction and becoming the master of the Mediterranean, a classic Total War scenario. The next campaign I'll talk about is Imperator Augustus. This campaign begins in the era of the Second Triumvirate, that is, the civil war between Antony and Octavius. It is definitely a cool start date that has a more Roman focus. There are fewer playable factions this time, since Rome has conquered so much of the map, but you can still get some variety here, and playing a smaller faction going up against the large Romans or Parthians can still give you that grand campaign feel. Seeing a strong, fully formed Parthia in a Total War campaign is also nice to see here. There aren't too many campaigns or mods, even for the original Rome, that include a playable Parthia at its height, and it's refreshing to see. If you do want a Rome 1 mod that includes Parthia at its height, you might want to try one of the Fall of the Republic Rise of the Empire mods, which include such a Parthia. Empire Divided was the last grand campaign added, and as I said before, I'm glad to see it here. I understand that people have reservations about this one, and feel like it should have been an expansion for Attila, but I like that it's part of Rome 2. It completes it for me. Rome was still a few centuries away from its final collapse, so I feel like even though it is a late Roman campaign, it probably still fits in with the Rome 2 campaigns more so than the Attila ones. It definitely is more of a glorious, heroic scenario than would be appropriate for Attila. Now, the campaign does have a makeover in order to make it feel like a late Roman era campaign. The unit rosters are new, units have been reskinned to look more appropriate for the era for all the factions. There are new buildings, and there are even Mithraic and Christian community buildings that provide various bonuses and penalties that I find to be very cool. One very nice touch in this campaign is that when playing as the Kingdom of Armenia, and you embrace Christianity, you can construct the Echmiadzin Cathedral building, which I think is a very cool and surprising touch for a game like Rome 2. Aurelian's story campaign is also quite cool, and of course, for certain factions you get heroic sort of goals, like for the Sassanids and Aurelian, and your faction leader can't die, he just gets injured, or she, if you play as the Palmyran Empire. So, I like Empire Divided. I feel like it adds a nice late-era campaign that was missing from Rome 2 before. The first regional campaign released for the game was Caesar in Gaul. I remember its launch. A lot of people were still upset about Rome 2 in general, since it was still in an imperfect state, and Caesar in Gaul was not exactly the scenario that was going to change people's minds about the game. And it wasn't seen as any sort of savior, but I ended up picking it up at launch anyway. I actually enjoyed it quite a bit, even back then. It was a more character-driven, story-focused game, and I felt this was a good expansion for Rome 2 at the time, especially. There are clear goals, the map is a nice, focused map of Gaul, and it looks nicer than the regular Grand Campaign. It's just basic Total War fun. It was sort of like the Napoleon to Rome 2's Empire. It took the good elements of Rome 2 and focused on them. However, like some of Napoleon's campaigns, this campaign of course has replayability issues, which of course arise when you have a more railroaded, focused experience. But in any case, I feel like it's what Rome 2 needed at the time, and if you haven't played it, it's a fun experience. The next regional campaign was Hannibal at the Gates. This was one I didn't buy at release. Now, it's again another focused regional experience that focuses on the Second Punic War and Hannibal's invasion of Italy through the Alps. Now, in the Grand Campaign, it tends to seem like the war between Rome and Carthage always ends up being rather anticlimactic. This is true of Rome 1 as well. Oftentimes one side is a pushover, even though occasionally you do get a cool campaign where your opponent puts up stiff resistance. Now, this campaign seeks to make the Second Punic War feel as epic as it should be, and it indeed does that, I think. I found it quite enjoyable, but like Caesar and Gaul and other focused, character-driven story Total War campaigns, it does have a sort of replayability issue and can feel a bit railroady at times, but that's the nature of the thing. The next one is the Wrath of Sparta campaign. Now this one, in terms of the campaign map, is what I'm talking about. I really like the idea behind the Wrath of Sparta. It takes place during the Peloponnesian Wars between the Empire of Athens and Sparta and her allies. The map is very nice. I love it. It's how detailed I wish the Grand Campaign was in Rome 2. When you mouse over every region, you get a historical description of it, which I think is a nice touch. Now again, the campaign is laser-focused on the events of the Peloponnesian War, and it is story-driven, but this one does feel more sandboxy than the previous regional campaigns, due to how zoomed in and detailed the map of Greece and Western Asia Minor is. Now, that doesn't mean I feel the campaign is perfect. One aspect that is a bit rough are the battles in this campaign. Since almost every faction fighting each other is a Greek city-state using hoplites or some variant of the exact same unit roster, which are some of the best defensive anti-cavalry infantry in the game, melees take a long time to complete. Adding to this, Greek cavalry is not great, so flanking and causing routes against these heavy spear units is extra difficult. I still enjoy the battles, don't get me wrong, but in my opinion, they just take too long as a bunch of hoplites fight it out for 25 minutes. Still, I really like Wrath of Sparta's campaign, and it has inspired some cool mods based on this excellent map, like the Demetrios Poliorketes mod. Rise of the Republic was the last campaign DLC to be added to Rome 2, and it's the one I have the least experience with, personally, but I suppose this is true for most people, since it was the last one. It's not a bad experience. It plays on a large, zoomed-in map of Italy and its surrounding provinces, and starts in the 7th century, when Rome was still trying to find its footing in the Italian peninsula. It's a cool setting, but honestly, I feel like this setting was done a bit better in mods like Peninsula Italica for the original Rome. I still enjoy it, and I appreciate the early start date. I wish more Total War games would go for earlier start dates, and hopefully Total War Troy is a sign that they are open to a full Bronze Age scenario. Now Rome 2 also has several faction pack DLCs. These are a give and take. I know there are a ton of players that just play vanilla and don't touch mods, so these packs are a good way for these players to unlock more factions and get new experiences. However, for those of us that do use mods, these faction packs are often limiting and can be annoying as well. For example, let's say you want to play the Saka Rauka campaign in Divide et Impera, and see how it compares to the Saka campaign in Europa Barbarorum 2 for Medieval 2 Total War. However, you find out that since a DLC has been released that unlocks the nomadic factions officially, you have to purchase that DLC before you can unlock the unique Saka faction in Divide et Impera, which is a totally different faction that's almost completely overhauled compared to the nomadic factions unlocked by CA in the Grand Campaign. It's a bit silly, since Divide et Impera changes so much about the game and the factions that they almost have nothing to do with the factions being unlocked as DLC. But it is what it is. It's a give and take. There are good aspects of having these packs, and negative aspects too. The unit packs are not as interesting to me, since they basically just give niche units that you aren't going to use that much. I suppose the Daughters of Mars pack for the female units for certain factions are cool, and the Camel Cataphracts for Parthia and the Beasts of War DLC are also pretty nice. Now, when you start a campaign, you immediately notice that this game is built on a completely different engine when compared to the original. The most striking difference, once you get over how large settlements look on the campaign map, for me, is the province system. Now, one of the issues in Rome 1 and Medieval 2 and their mods is that if the campaign map was not sufficiently large and settlements were not sufficiently spaced out, it became a siege fest, and every settlement in Rome 1 and Medieval 2 can get walls. Now, this walled siege fest issue is not just an issue for those older games. I would say it was an issue for Empire with its horrendous fort battles, and Shogun 2's all too frequent castle battles, though I do happen to enjoy Shogun 2 castle battles, a guilty pleasure, as well. With Rome 2's province system, only the so-called capital of the province can get walls. This is probably the biggest sacrifice for the sake of gameplay in the game, I think. Settlements that you know had fortifications historically simply cannot be fortified in Rome 2 since they are not province capitals. I understand that this was done in order to minimize the amount of walled settlement battles and reduce the feeling of having a siege fest campaign, but I feel like there could have been a compromise made here. Perhaps once you have researched quite a bit of the tech tree or upgraded certain buildings, you can build fortification walls for non-province capitals. In any case, I feel like this solution was a bit heavy-handed. However, I have to admit it does what it is intended to do. It reduces walled settlement siege battles. And I have to say the unwalled settlement siege battles can be pretty fun. The province system also affects the campaign gameplay. Now, once you take an entire province, you have the ability to set a province edict, giving you a bonus to the entire province depending on which one you pick. You could get a tax bonus, a food bonus, a public order bonus, etc. Additionally, each settlement only has a certain number of building slots that can grow over time to a certain amount, depending on the settlement. A lot of the building bonuses for certain aspects, like public order or commerce income bonuses, apply to the whole province. All of these facts push the player to expand in certain ways, since you get very nice benefits from controlling entire provinces. While I don't feel like this is an inherently bad system, it does have its issues, especially in terms of immersion. While some of these provinces are fairly accurate in terms of the land and settlements they encompass, some of the provinces are indeed amalgamations of several different provinces, and due to the large size of each settlement taking up so much space on the map, preventing the inclusion of a lot more settlements, I think, this leaves a lot of historical kingdoms and provinces out of the game entirely. Some examples of these amalgam provinces include Galatia et Cappadocia, and Bithynia et Pontus, which not only include the provinces they claim to include, but also other smaller lands that could have also been represented on the map, like Paphlagonia, or Isauria, or Comagene. This issue is exacerbated by the fact that the campaign map cannot be edited, so certain omissions and amalgamations could not be rectified even if modders tried to do so for their modded campaigns. As I mentioned, there is a limit to the number of buildings you can construct in settlements, so there is an element of strategy in terms of picking and choosing what kind of settlement and what kind of province you want to build. You can make a province that is purely economy-focused, military-focused, food-focused, or perhaps you want it to be well-balanced. Again, this is a give and take. While I like having these new strategic elements to think about when taking whole provinces and expanding into new provinces, I don't quite like how it railroads the player into certain avenues of expansion, oftentimes rather ahistorically. These limitations are not limited to the buildings, however. Agents, armies, and navies are also quite limited in terms of how many you can field at once. And you can no longer field armies with no general. Now again, this is a bit of a give and take. This creates a rather annoying situation where you can't simply transfer units to another general's army simply by moving that unit, commanded by a captain, across the map to the other army. You have to bring those two generals together, along with their whole armies, and exchange troops between the armies in order to do so. I find this to be a rather annoying limitation. However, in terms of having armies only led by generals, I'm okay with it. While I do miss promoting captains who successfully led heroic battles, I definitely do not miss the AI making a million tiny armies, or making a tiny weak army and sending its best general to command that army, while leaving their main royal army under the command of a meager, vulnerable, weak captain. While, of course, the first option should have been to improve the AI so it didn't do those things, while preserving that freedom for the player, this technically fixes that problem as well. Your small kingdom is limited to just a few armies and agents, but as you take more provinces and increase your so-called imperium level, this limit increases to reflect your growth from a local statelet or tribe to a regional power, and from a regional power to an imperial one. I actually like this mechanic, as it does give you a sense of progress rather than just mindlessly blitzing province after province with no goals or feeling of evolution in your faction, which is something that you can feel is missing in a basic Rome 1 campaign, for example. Another major change to the campaign gameplay is the way navies work. In Rome 2, an army can march to the coast and immediately build transport fleets in order to traverse the seas. Of course, it is prudent to have a normal battle fleet ready to accompany your transports, since your armies are extremely vulnerable to pirates and other factions if unaccompanied. Now, at first, I felt this mechanic was a bit immersion breaking, but actually now I feel it's a decent compromise between realism and gameplay, and it does get rid of something I found really annoying in the older titles, constructing fleets to transport my troops manually, and the phenomenon of entire armies being transported by one or two ships. So again, it has its positives and negatives, like most of Rome 2's aspects. Regarding armies, there is a new mechanic that I actually quite like, stances. There are now a few stances you can choose from that reflect what you want your army to be focusing on. They can fortify and take a hit to their movement points while constructing temporary fortifications and defending the area they're standing on. They can raid an enemy province and steal wealth. They can force march and go longer distances at the expense of morale. I like this addition a lot. Mods like DEI, Divide et Impera, make this mechanic even more interesting and awesome, and more varied from faction to faction. So, for example, nomadic factions are better at raiding, while others are better at fortifying, etc. Now for the agents. I like that the limits on agents are a bit more stringent here than in Shogun 2, for example, since in Shogun 2 they were a bit much, especially on higher difficulties. Unfortunately, they also have less personality than Shogun 2's agents as well, and not just because they lack videos, but they can still be overpowered and abused by the player and the AI, nonetheless. I definitely prefer the toned-down agents in DEI to the overpowered agents in vanilla, with spies that can steal tons of food and make entire kingdoms starve with their antics. It's just maybe a bit much. But then, historically, you think about how Mithridates VI of Pontus used his agents to orchestrate anti-Roman uprisings all over Asia Minor, and you think, agents should be a powerful force in the right hands indeed. Indeed. Again, it's a give and take. I always forget about my agents in the original Rome, as everyone can see from my Let's Plays, but I rarely forget about them here. One of the last updates to Rome 2 was the update that added politics and family trees to the game. These mechanics should absolutely have been in from the start. Not having family trees in a Roman period game about a bunch of ancient kingdoms and interesting monarchs and characters is just borderline criminal. The politics mechanic, where you have to balance your power and authority while keeping other political forces within your kingdom or republic happy, is also a rather welcome addition. While both of these feel a bit tacked on, especially due to the rather sloppy UI that sort of takes the joy out of the family tree section, I am glad that they added these mechanics in. The family tree allows you to see the history of your main characters as you progress through the campaign, and the politics does add a bit more unique flavor, especially to the main grand campaign. One major issue I have with the campaign mechanics is that while I like the fact that each faction develops over the course of the game by increasing its Imperium and by completing the missions, these Imperium levels provide similar bonuses to every faction. Barbarian factions and nomadic factions essentially play the same sort of settlement management game as the settled kingdoms and republics of the Mediterranean and the Middle East, and it is rather unfortunate that more wasn't done to make these aspects unique for certain factions, especially since there was a separate paid nomadic factions DLC. Since I've recently been playing the Sakarauka nomadic campaign in Europa Barbarorum 2 for Medieval 2 Total War, I have come to appreciate how the EB2 team have made the campaign feel distinct for them, giving them certain bonuses and abilities as nomads, while giving them nice faction-specific reforms that represent them settling down and learning how to manage a kingdom consisting mostly of settled peoples. Same for the Sarmatians there, to a lesser degree. These aspects are missing in Rome 2, though they do get a few bonuses to raiding and things like that. Mods like Divide et Impera do improve these distinctions and add necessary reforms that increase the variety in the way you have to think and play as certain factions, so at least there's that. There are, of course, a few other new mechanics added in Rome 2 that I find to be completely positive. One change of note is that units are no longer recruited in your settlements, but they are recruited directly by your generals to their army, no matter where they are standing in your province. I feel this is a welcome change, since it's not like people were recruited only in the main capital settlement of a province, but in the countryside and other minor settlements as well. So this was a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. Campaign diplomacy is not handled like in Rome 1 or Medieval 2, where you have to physically send a diplomat to another faction. You just open up the diplomacy panel and talk to whoever you want. For me, as someone who always forgets about his diplomats in the older games, this is a very friendly change. Settlements have built-in garrisons that can be enhanced by particular buildings, which I find to be an excellent addition. Empire, Napoleon, and Shogun 2 had this garrison mechanic as well, but I feel like Rome 2 has done it a bit more justice, and garrisons can be a bit beefier, especially if you have recruitment buildings or a garrison-type settlement building. Agents are also more versatile than in previous games. There are 3 types of agents: dignitaries, spies, and champions, and they each have their own strengths and weaknesses. You can place your agents in your armies in order to give certain passive bonuses, such as increased campaign movement range, army training, or bonuses to certain things like bow accuracy or the strength of melee infantry. Additionally, agents can deploy in either friendly or enemy provinces, where they hurt the owner if it's an enemy, and help you if it's your province. Overall, I like the agents in Rome 2, and I feel that they aren't quite as annoying as they can be in Shogun 2. However, as I said, I prefer the toned-down agents of mods like Divide et Impera. Of course, I have to talk about the campaign AI. When Rome 2 was first released, the campaign AI was horrible, just laughably bad. They would only recruit slingers, they would often starve themselves, and they would launch suicidal attacks every 2 seconds. Now, the AI in Rome 2 isn't perfect right now, but it's so much better than it was. And it's better than the campaign AI in the original Rome Total War, that's for sure. Additionally, diplomacy in Rome 2 is much better as well, so that is definitely a point or two in Rome 2's favor here. The AI still launches suicidal attacks at times, They can still make silly mistakes in terms of army stances and where to march, but all in all, it's decent, especially in mods like Divide et Impera and Wars of the Gods. The battles. So indeed, now it's time to talk about the battles. Now, everyone knows I'm more of a campaign guy than a guy that dwells on the battles, but I'll try to do my best here. The Warscape engine that Rome 2 is based on was originally designed for Empire Total War, which of course was a game focused more on gun battles than melee combat. However, Empire did have some melee combat in it, and indeed Rome 2's predecessor, Shogun 2, was more melee focused despite having some gun combat. Now, Rome 2 has issues that unpatched Shogun 2 had as well. Missiles are rather overpowered, and battles at times can end a bit too quickly. However, I have to say that one of the aspects that made the original Rome so interesting, the fact that pretty much every faction played in a unique way with very unique unit rosters and thus battle tactics, is still in play here. While Shogun 2 had its excellent Fire Emblem-esque rock, paper, scissors tactics, Rome 2 takes that formula and makes it a bit more complicated, since there are more unique factions and units. Swordsmen are generally more effective against spearmen, axemen are stronger against heavily armored units, horse archers can run circles around melee troops and really harass them, foot archers are excellent counters to horse archers, cataphract charges to the rear of just about any engaged infantry are devastating, heavy hoplites are excellent on defense but weaker on the attack, etc. There are just so many combinations and scenarios possible in Rome 2 that I find the battles to be fun in that respect. Much has been made of the combat feeling a bit off in Rome 2 and the newer Total Wars in general when compared to Rome 1 and Medieval 2. Now for me, Rome 1 feels the best in battle. Why is that? Well, there are several reasons. Missiles feel more impactful, for one, more so than Medieval 2 in general. Melees are more engaging. The animations are quick and dynamic, again, more so than Medieval 2, though rather basic. And cavalry charges feel very impactful. Probably the most impactful in the series. I really like the Rome 1 cavalry charges. Now, Empire and Napoleon had different types of cavalry that were meant for the gunpowder age, and the cavalry charges in those games felt appropriate for that era. Shogun 2, the first mainly melee game to run on the Warscape engine created for Empire, actually did a surprisingly great job, in my opinion, at using the engine to its fullest, in creating an engaging experience for battles. Melee battles, that is. It is a bit unfortunate that Rome 2 feels like a bit of a step back in this regard, compared to Shogun 2. Cavalry charges in Shogun 2, though there is of course a scarcity of cataphract-like heavy cavalry for the Sengoku period Japanese warfare, felt pretty good. They sort of provided this trample sort of feeling with the camera shaking mechanic and the sound effects, which are also there in Rome 2 to a degree. While I wouldn't say they were as good as the original Rome's charges, they still felt pretty good in their own way, and I like the animations. I would say that the Attila charges feel pretty similar to Shogun 2, and they are quite well done. I like them. In Rome 2, they don't feel quite as nice, and part of that has to do with the collision mechanics and the matched animation combat. I don't quite exactly know what all of the issue is here, but they don't have quite the same decisive crunch feeling to them. However, I can't say that this is a game-breaking issue for me, and indeed it is possible to pull off some nasty charges. While playing the Empire Divided campaign, while preparing for this review, I was able to pull off some nice noble cataphract charges against some legionaries, and they felt really good. As good as some legendary charges in Shogun 2. Other than those collision mechanics and my desire to see a Total War game reclaim the excellent feel of cavalry charges in Rome 1, I like the battles in Rome 2. Pulling off nice victories feels good, pulling off an excellent charge right at the climax of a battle feels good, Scattering enemy infantry and picking them apart with skirmisher and horse archer units feels good. Nailing a Macedonian-style hammer and anvil feels good. There's a lot of variety here, and I enjoy and applaud that. Could it have been done better? Yeah, but it's still good in my opinion, and there's so much variety here that there's hours and hours of fun to be had with these battles. I want to talk a bit about sieges. Shogun 2 was the first Total War game where sieges were actually dynamic and pretty fun for me. And I have to say that Rome 2 has pretty cool sieges as well. I enjoy the unwalled settlement battles, the amphibious port battles, and even the walled city battles. They don't feel as clunky to me as siege battles in Rome and Medieval 2, especially due to improved pathfinding that doesn't make me want to pull my hair out. Please check my Medieval 2 streams and Let's Plays for good examples of that. And due to some additions, there are several different ways to play them. When playing as a cavalry-heavy faction, it is now possible to use your cavalry effectively in sieges in order to skirmish, distract, and harass a more powerful enemy in order to defeat them. It's cool to set up strong defensive infantry at choke points and use offensive troops like light axemen or swordsmen to flank a larger enemy attacking force that has been bottlenecked. It's also so nice that the pathfinding is good enough to where cavalry can actually charge enemies in a settlement, so they are actually somewhat effective. I also like that the capture the flag or square aspect has been reduced in importance in general. All in all, sieges in Rome 2 are enjoyable for me, and definitely feel more fair, since my units generally listen to my orders, instead of dancing around due to pathfinding issues. The pathfinding is even a bit better than in Shogun 2, in my experience. The aesthetics. The aesthetics are definitely one of the most controversial aspects of Rome 2, especially when compared to a classic like Rome 1. Rome 1 was the perfect blend of cartoony enough graphics, immersive 2D art, and an epic soundtrack. Rome 2 takes a bit of a different approach in all these aspects. Its soundtrack is definitely less memorable, and is not as epic as Rome 1's. Or perhaps the word I'm looking for is, it isn't quite as dramatic as Rome 1's. And that's too bad. Rome 1's soundtrack really gets the player pumped and excited, but Rome 2's is more... A lot of the time it's more like the pre-battle tension music in Rome 1, but more often, it's more introspective. The campaign map tracks in Rome 2 are good, but they aren't quite as atmospheric as Rome 1's, I would say. I don't dislike Rome 2's soundtrack, and I appreciate the more classical approach of Richard Beddoe, who composed the soundtracks for Empire, Napoleon, and Rome 2, I believe. Napoleon remains one of my favorite soundtracks, in fact, for Total War. But I have to say, I prefer Rome 1's OST overall, no doubt. One of the major issues for me regarding aesthetics is the campaign map itself and its various elements. Some of it looks nice and detailed indeed, but some aspects are big and not pretty. Cities, while they look nice, look a bit off to me. They're just way too large. I understand they want to give the feeling of you building up your cities as they grow, something like Civilization 6 with the districts, but I don't like the way it looks very much, just aesthetically. It's something that I've just had to get used to, since that's the way it is here. I like that in Three Kingdoms and Troy, they have backed away from this design aspect. Regarding agents and armies, I like that when they're moving, they switch to riding on a horse. There's something pleasing to me about that. One other niggle for me is the coastlines. I know that for gameplay purposes, they wanted to make it extra clear which coastlines are cliffs, and which coastlines are landable for amphibious invasions. But the difference is, it's too stark, it's too obvious, it's too in your face. Shogun 2 successfully accomplished this. They successfully accomplished communicating these differences in terrain with a campaign map that was at the time the most aesthetically pleasing one in the series, and it might still be, I think. Another issue for me is the 2D art. Rome 1 had excellent, very cool 2D art and legendary portraits, way better than Medieval 2's vanilla portraits. Shogun 2 had excellent art as well, and the 3D heads in the bottom left corner didn't look that bad. In Rome 2, the 3D heads, don't really look that great. This aspect was improved in DLC like Empire Divided, but in the Grand Campaign, they don't look that good to me. Of course, the other issue is the building cards and unit cards. The unit cards in Rome 1 were very nice. Shogun 2 had legendary unit cards, and I really appreciated the stylized artwork. But in Rome 2, I think they took the idea of stylized artwork a bit too far, and in the wrong direction. The black, flat Greek vase-style unit and building cards are kind of cool if you think about it, but honestly, I just don't like them that much. They're not that pleasing. At first, I was sort of a defender of them, since I don't think they are immersion-breaking or anything, and they are unique, but they just aren't that aesthetically pleasing, and they aren't that cool-looking. And when you see every faction having the same sort of black Greek vase-style depictions, it gets old. I definitely think they took this feedback seriously, and they made some nice-looking unit cards for the Empire Divided campaign. The unit cards there just fit in with the atmosphere better, I think. The atmosphere of Rome 2. I feel like the unit cards and art in general in mods like Divide et Impera and Wars of the Gods look nicer and actually make the game look and feel improved quite a bit. Conclusion. When Rome 2 was first released, it was not received well at all by a large part of the fanbase. The AI was pretty broken, many of the new mechanics were not liked, the inability to mod the map annoyed people, the art design and aesthetic of the game was controversial, the fact that it was just the Grand Campaign, which was still fairly bare bones and without too many playable factions at the time, was unfortunate. But the game had potential. I feel like the extensive patching and the large number of DLC campaigns the game has received, especially the nice free DLC Imperator Augustus, the Politics and Family Tree patch, and the Empire Divided DLC especially, have really fleshed out Rome 2 for me. It no longer feels bare bones or too rushed in general. Of course, as is clear from many of my criticisms, there are many aspects of the game that I don't agree with, or that I think could have been done differently. But all in all, Rome 2 right now, in 2021, is definitely a much more fleshed out and a much more complete and interesting experience now than it was at launch. Now, in 2021, with the release of all the DLC packs and campaigns for Rome 2, it truly is a gigantic experience. A player that picks up the entire collection can play this game for years and not have experienced everything it has to offer yet. It not only has several focused regional campaigns, but also 3 grand campaign experiences that are fairly unique and have their own mechanics, unit buildings, and factions. While it does have some mechanics that are debatable as to how good they are, some of its new aspects are actually quite cool, and I'm glad they added them in. Now, people can debate endlessly over the combat in the later Total War games compared to the older ones, and everyone actually knows my favorite in that regard, the original Rome Total War. And you know what? The original Rome Total War, together with all its excellent mods, can provide an experience that is as varied and deep as that provided in Rome 2. And since you can mod the campaign map in the original Rome, I suppose you could say that it can potentially provide more, depending on what kind of campaigns you're into. But as the original Rome ages and becomes less and less compatible with our modern systems, Rome 2's experience, together with the ability to do multiplayer versus and co-op campaigns, which I find to be one of the most fun experiences in Total War in general, feels solid and varied. Do I recommend buying Rome 2 and all its DLCs at full price in 2021? No way. It's 2021. It's 8 years after the release of Rome 2. I feel old now. But you should pick up the whole package on a 75% discount. Absolutely. I feel that the whole package is definitely worth it for all the hours of fun, and especially the multiplayer campaign fun. I really enjoy that aspect it can provide. This is not to mention the excellent mods available for Rome 2, including the massive overhauls like the Darth Mod-esque Wars of the Gods, the amazing slow-paced DVD et Impera, and smaller campaign mods like Dimitrios Poliorketes for Wrath of Sparta. And there you have it. That's pretty much all I have to say about Total War Rome 2 in 2021. I just wanted to take a look at it and do a sort of spoiler-free review for everyone who might still be looking to purchase the game or might want to go back to the game and pick up some of the newer DLC like Empire Divided or Rise of the Republic. Because I think Rome 2 does deserve another look, especially if you haven't picked it up since the Politics and Family Tree update. Additionally, I have to say that the development of some major mods like Wars of the Gods and DVD et Impera really improve Rome 2 in a lot of aspects, and they really make it feel like a new game. They breathe new life into this game. And I actually, playing a bunch of the campaigns and a bunch of the factions for this review, I really found myself having a lot of fun. And yeah, also I want to mention I'm playing Rome 2 on a budget gaming laptop from 2017 with a NVIDIA GTX 1050 mobile graphics card. So that's why the graphics in this review for the game are not the best compared to other reviewers out there, because I was playing on around medium settings at 1080p. But I hope it looked nice enough for everybody. And I hope you all found this video enjoyable. So in any case, I also want to mention that if you want to support the channel, you can like and subscribe and leave a comment on this video, and check out my other videos on Europa Barbarorum 2 and my retrospectives on Empire and Napoleon and some of my other videos. And if you want to support the channel and keep the channel going and help me improve the channel as well, then you can become a channel member by using the link in the description. And by doing that, you'll become an Eastern Infantry or a Cataphract supporter of the channel. And you will also gain access to the hot seat campaigns that we are playing together currently. We are currently playing a hot seat campaign in Vanilla Beyond. Me, the moderator of my Discord, the City-State of Lagash, which you can also join in the description below, and a hot seat master, as well as most of my channel members. And it would be fun if for the next hot seat campaign I had new members to join. It would make it super fun. So in any case, yeah, I'll see everyone in the next video. I hope you enjoyed it. See ya.